On any given night, there's 53,000 people suffering from homelessness in the greater Los Angeles area.
Homeward LA is a project designed
to inspire the community to take more action.
I got a group of writers together, and we met with individuals who have experienced homelessness and identified stories from their lives, and then developed those stories as monologues.
Yeah, this is a spot I used to sleep in a couple years ago. It breaks your heart, you know, it breaks your soul. I don't want to die on the sidewalk.
There's a certain freedom in being vulnerable.
For years, I held on to this story, wouldn't tell nobody, so it's helping me to grow.
In our first 2 years, hundreds of actors shared these powerful stories with thousands of audience members, raising over $180,000 to help our unhoused neighbors through a nonprofit on Skid Row called the Midnight Mission.
Like, now I get to reunite with my kids. Now we can start healing, you know. Now I get to be a mother again.
Peace, family. Welcome to Homewood Live, presented by Homeward LA, a grassroots project committed to sharing stories from people who've been homeless to inspire the community to take action to end the homeless crisis. We strongly believe this starts with a shared vision of a world where all of our neighbors are housed. I'm Sean Baker. It is my tremendous honor and pleasure to be your host every Thursday evening for the next 4 weeks for this very special Homeward Live event. You will hear powerful stories from people who've experienced homelessness, performed by great actors, followed by a candid, intimate conversation between the actor and the real person who lived the story. Now, Homeward LA would love for you to click the link in the description to leave your email address so that we can stay in touch with you and thank you properly for tuning in to tonight's event. Now, let's drop in. You know this legendary 3-time primetime Emmy Award-winning actor for his work on The Handmaid's Tale, Get Out, and The West Wing, to name a few. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Bradley Whitford as he shares a story of the rediscovering of faith from a remarkable man named Dusty.
Dear Mom, I bet you're surprised to be getting this letter. It's been a long, long time. I've been thinking about my life a lot, Mom, how I ended up where I ended up. And I thought I should write to you. Not to try to explain or make excuses for things I've done, but to share something with you, something that I think it's important for you to know. You ever see a homeless guy walking along and talking to himself? Yeah, you think maybe they're crazy, right? Well, if you see me talking, it's not to myself. No, I'm talking to God. You can believe him and me got a lot to talk about. We got a real history. See, my father was a minister. He did everything he could for anyone he could. It didn't matter if you were rich or poor, one of his flock or not. If you needed help, he was there. He was the greatest man that I ever knew, and I was proud to be his son. Now, me, when I was 9 years old, my class had a project. What do you want to be when you grow up? Some kids said fireman, some said policeman, the suck-up said teacher. But me, I said professional thief or hitman. And I meant it too. Thing is, I knew I could never be the man my father was, that I'd never measure up. So I spent my life being so different that no one could compare me to him. And I accomplished what I set out to do in school that day. No, I wasn't a hitman, but I was a thief. How'd that go? I ended up living on the streets, getting loaded every chance I could. So not great. But eventually I got clean and I moved back home with my parents. I got married. I had a son. Was working as a contractor. I was doing good. My parents even started trusting me again. But then my father was in an accident. His legs got burned up in an electric blanket that caught on fire. We didn't even realize how bad it was until later. He went into a coma, and then we had to decide to. I mean, here was my father, this great man who devoted his life to the Lord and to other people, a man who never spent one day thinking of himself, only of others. And he died this horrible death, scared and in pain. And that day, the day that we had to turn off his machines, I decided I didn't believe in God anymore. I also fell off the wagon hard, and I ended up back on the streets for years. Something about me, I walk. I love to walk all day, every day, even when I'm loaded at my worst. I walk. I love the freedom. And sometimes while walking, I'd be talking to God. I'd be telling him that I hated him, that he didn't deserve praise. I tell him there was no reason a man as great as my father should have to die in pain, that if he couldn't spare that kind of man, then what good was he? But what I didn't know at the time was something had happened. Something started when my father was brought to the hospital. See, the cops used to chase me all the time. I'd see him and I'd run. But during the whole thing with my father, we kind of got to know each other, me and the cops. And they kind of saw that I wasn't so bad. I was just a regular guy who made mistakes like everyone else. So when I started getting loaded and hit the streets again, instead of chasing me, they'd stop and they'd ask if I was all right. And then one day they came to me and they told me there was a homeless guy that just took the hospital and he was alone. And they asked me if I'd be willing to just go and sit with him. I did. And then they started asking me to do this again and again. I would just read them or sit with them, let them know that someone cared. Everyone just wants to know that they aren't. Being on the streets can be lonely. Believe me. I know. Mom, I know you're disappointed in me, but I want to tell you that in the city of Norwalk, if a homeless person gets sick, the cops come out and look for me, not to arrest me, but to bring me there to sit with them. One night they told me about this lady who was dying. She was pretty old, and it was just her time. They said she had no family as far as they knew and asked if I would come sit with her. So I went and held her hand while she slept. She opened her eyes once and saw me there with her, closed her eyes and passed. Sitting there in that quiet room, holding this lady's hand, I realized something. Dad dying actually allowed me to find myself, to find my calling. I know I'm not the man Dad was, not even close. But I am proud of what I am now. maybe for the first time in my life. I am sober now. I have been for a while, and I'm not going back. This time I have a purpose. And I believe in God again. I know you spent a lot of years wondering what you did wrong. The answer is nothing. I had a childhood good as anybody's. You made sure we had food and clothing and love. You were a perfect mother. And I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry you ever had to think you weren't. I love you. I miss you. Love, Dusty.
Mr. Bradley Whitford, thank you so much, sir. Even with technical difficulties, it's just it's beautiful. I read a quote by you where you said, "I'm absolutely convinced that the best acting is not in school, but being in recess." So
Yes,
yes,
that's true.
let
Yeah,
me watch you play, sir.
well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's a beautiful piece.
Yes, I want to acknowledge the writer who actually interviewed Dusty and wrote it. His name is Edward Allen Bernero. I know we're aware that Dusty couldn't be with us today, unfortunately, but I want to introduce you to him via video. So we have a clip, and we're going to share that with you now.
I've been on the streets for over 25 years. You get stuck out there. You think you're only going to be out there for a minute, and minutes turn into hours and years. You kind of give up thinking that's just how it's going to be for the rest of your life. Even if you know there's help, you don't go get it. I gave up, you know, and I didn't have to. Somebody actually wrote my story, stuff I don't like to think about, you know, that I kind of wish didn't happen or would go away. But they're not, so it kind of helps me like a cleansing for me. I hope a lot of families, maybe they'll look at homeless a little different. They're not bad people, they just made some mistakes, you know, and they're trying to recover from that. You don't have to have pity on them, but remember, they're people too.
Yeah, beautiful man, beautiful man. Joining us, I want to introduce, he is the interim chief program officer for the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, where he is responsible for the Los Angeles Continuum of Care's homeless rehousing system. Most recently, he has led the county's response to COVID-19, provided interim housing to more than 4,000 highly vulnerable individuals across Los Angeles County. He has a Master of Public Health degree and has been working at the intersection of housing, behavioral health, and public health for more than 15 years in Boston, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Nathaniel VerGow. Welcome, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Glad I could join you.
Yes, and thank you again, Bradley Whitford, for joining us. We really appreciate it and so honored to have you. How are you gentlemen doing with the pandemic and everything that's going on in our world? How are you guys holding up?
Well, it's I was just saying earlier today, it's a real lesson in the fact that we don't the world is out of our control. I think it's really disorienting for everybody. I worry about I mean, the most alarming thing about this is the way this virus is feasting on the most vulnerable among us and exposing in ways that were unimaginable 6 months ago the systemic injustices. And you know, yesterday I was driving by a homeless encampment and thinking, you know, along the 110 and thinking, my God, how are these people supposed to deal with this? You know, I heard a health expert saying that in dealing with a crisis, the main element is preparedness. And we as a culture have left people uninsured, homeless, economically insecure. And I think it's important that we focus on those people who don't get focused on, largely because, I don't know, they don't vote. I don't know.
No, that's a great point.
Yeah, a colleague of mine likes to say that you can't let a crisis go to waste. And
Yeah.
to your point about all the inequities that have been laid bare as a result of COVID, the fact that children are at an alarming rate going without food because they're not getting food at school, just across the board, all of the inequities that are built into our society right now are being laid bare. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to look at those inequities and figure out how to address them as we move forward. That to prepare for the next crisis means that we have to address all of those inequities, and that's steeped in structural racism, in how we have dealt with poverty for decades, or not, as has been the case for many respects.
Nathaniel, can you share with us exactly what LAHSA does and what work that you do for them?
Yeah, so LAHSA is, as the name says, we're the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority. We are a joint powers authority between the city and the county. And our primary focus is that we are the continuum of care lead. And what that means is that we are the body that is responsible for applying for federal funding on homelessness and distributing that money to nonprofit agencies across the county that provide the services, and ensuring that that money is being used appropriately and most effectively as possible. So we, along with partners from the health agencies with the county and departments within the city and the county, work to make sure that we have a rehousing system that is functioning as optimally as possible. And it's a really difficult task here in LA with the housing shortages that we have across the board and the huge numbers of folks who are rent burdened on a daily basis. And that number is just climbing every day with folks unemployed as a result of COVID-19.
Hey, Nathaniel, I know that Garcetti has talked about redirecting some of the funds that go to perhaps over militarize our police force in the city. Are any of those funds going to be redirected to the homeless crisis?
So we're working right now with the mayor's office and the Department of Mental Health to talk through what could be a different way to respond to 911 calls that are not violent or immediately criminal in nature. There's a significant number of calls to our 911 system that are for folks who are having mental health or substance use crises, and sometimes even just because somebody is homeless. And so, it's not clear exactly how the funds will be distributed, but we're definitely having conversations with the city right now about different ways to respond to crises, so that it's not just falling on the shoulders of law enforcement, and so that there's less opportunity for homelessness and those who are disenfranchised to have law enforcement be their primary interaction from a public standpoint, from a public entity standpoint.
And I'm sorry, I may be yapping too much, but I'm curious about this. What is your biggest frustration? Is this crisis allowed to go on and to grow simply because it's not a priority, or is there some sort of governmental structural problem specifically in dealing with homelessness that we need to deal with? I always hear about like different jurisdictions create confusion and end up making it so that nothing gets done, and I just don't understand that part of it.
Yeah, I mean, my friends who work in finance, in the public sector, say that budgets are not financial documents; they're moral documents. And so I would say that this crisis, the crisis of homelessness, has been building for decades. decades and decades as a result of inappropriate policy around land use, well, I mean, we need to go back as far as post-war housing policy and the racist policies that led to white soldiers coming back from the war getting low interest loans to be able to buy homes at an extremely cheap rate, while folks of color were offered Section 8 vouchers that allows for a transfer of wealth for the white families, and a history of poverty ongoing for people of color. So that, coupled with housing policy that has not been, I apologize if you hear the noise, I'm home alone with my dog and she's desperate for attention. So you may hear some banging in the background, that's her, so I apologize for that. But decades of focus on not appropriate focus on building housing for affordable housing, especially. We have, Harvard does a study annually on housing affordability, and it's estimated that in LA County alone, we are short more than 500,000 units of affordable housing. So that 500,000 families that need and are eligible for affordable housing that don't have access to it. So it's been a long time coming. It's going to be, it will take a tremendous amount as a result for us to change the trajectory. But again, it's a question of, it's a moral question, not necessarily a fiscal question.
Mm.
Bradley, I know we had slight technical difficulties, but how did you feel after sharing Dusty's story?
I find this incredibly moving. There's just the resilience in this, and the redemption in it, and the unsentimental kind of redemption, just that his desire to check in with his mom. It really hit me. I have a friend from high school who recently lost her child to a heroin overdose, and it was a kid who struggled for decades, and the thing he wanted his mom to know was this was not her fault. So that really hit me. And we drive by these people all the time. We tend to think of this as an abstract social issue. I was saying before, I was at a thing at the UN where they were talking about immigration issues in Syria and refugees, and it's a completely abstract problem that nobody can connect with until you see a drowned child on the beach. It's the specific of one story that can really connect people. And I see him going through what, you can sense his excitement in talking about this, about how art has this capacity to sort of judo your difficulties in life, into a creative moment. And it was nice to see him sort of experience that. But it's very important to think of each of these people as individuals and not let their homelessness define them, as I think it tends to do, because as we drive by, it makes us uncomfortable. We feel guilty. We don't know what to do. And it is alarming to me how used to mass homelessness we've become. I mean, something that it feels like, 20 years ago would have shocked us is just, another encampment on a river, in the middle of a pandemic. It's unacceptable.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's frustrating. I mean, you drive by the freeway and you see them in the encampments, and you want to. You're saying, well, what can I do? You want to. I find myself, going and buying, lunch or dinner from a Trader Joe's, but you can't help everybody. You're thinking, this is one of the richest countries in the world, and we're so concerned about going to outer space and dealing with the aliens and talking to the aliens, but we got people here who are homeless that we need to talk to. We need to save. We need to inspire, to motivate, and really, that's what Homeward LA is all about. And Nathaniel, what were your feelings about Dusty's story and the work that you do? I mean, what spoke to you about his story?
I mean, it hit close to home. I don't know anybody that hasn't been touched by addiction, either directly or by 1 or 2 degrees of separation. And I think the notion of redemption, I think, is a powerful one, and I think it's one that we often save for fiction and for our movies and our books, and often don't allow the space for that with our fellow human beings. I think it's essential that when we see somebody who's experiencing homelessness, we don't lump them into this monolithic homeless category, because each person is an individual. Each person has a story, and it's not somebody's moral failings that are likely the reason that they're out on the street. And it's not a moral failing that somebody is struggling with addiction either. It is such a complex issue that folks have been studying it for decades now and don't have a clear understanding of what causes one person to become addicted and somebody with similar circumstances to not. So you can't chalk it up to somebody's moral character, that's their fault, and that's why they have substance use issues or mental health issues. And I think it's essential that we don't do that to people who are experiencing homelessness. I think it's also, for most folks, the most visible experience of homelessness, or the most visible image of homelessness, is the person with 6 or 7 jackets on, pushing a shopping cart full of what appears to be just junk, talking to themselves, or maybe even yelling. And that folks who have reached that degree of severity in their lives are the most visible, but are the minority of people experiencing homelessness. Every year we do a homeless count here in Los Angeles, and part of what we do with that is a demographic survey to get some information about the people who are actually experiencing homelessness. And in this past year's survey of folks who had experienced homelessness for the first time, they were on their first episode of homelessness, almost 60% of them said that it was directly related to economic hardship. And so it's not that they're that they're addicts, or that they're crazy, or that they have made bad choices. Well, they may have. I've made some bad choices in my life, but I've had an opportunity for redemption from those bad choices, and far too often we don't allow that opportunity for folks who have fallen into a state where they don't have a home.
And I think there's a couple of things that make this particularly difficult to deal with at this moment. There was a whole line of political theory that has a pretty big voice in this country, which goes somewhere along the lines that basically poverty is a moral issue. It's a personal problem. It's a moral failing. And it's combined with this absolutely absurd idea that the richer victims, that our first priority, we need to, at a moment of this horrible economic disparity, there's a big voice saying the richer victims, we need to cut their taxes and deregulate them. And that's obviously absurd. The other difficulty is there are these individual reasons for falling, into homelessness. There's a range of them, and there's not a simple answer. And with issues like this, if we don't have the courage to focus on it, we can get hypnotized by the complexity and throw our hands up in the air, which is, I think, is basically the way, the way that we deal with it, and that has to change.
You asked earlier a question about how we get out of this. I think I'm at least remembering that, and I think it's important for us to remember that the homeless rehousing system that I help to operate cannot end homelessness. We have to be working upstream. And by that, I mean investing in early childhood education so that from the very beginning, folks have a better opportunity to end up in a better place in their lives. We have to address the structures in our society that make it harder for a person of color to access basics like healthcare and education. There's so many factors outside of the individual that we have to address if we are going to end homelessness.
Well, you bring up a great a point, because we've heard actually in the community that sometimes people who are homeless will say no to housing. So what would either one of you say about that?
Well, as you said when you read my bio, I've been doing this work for 15 plus years now. And I will tell you, there's not a single client that I've worked with where I could offer them a key to a place where they could close and lock the door and feel safe, where somebody has said no. Not a single person.
Wow.
There's a difference when you're talking about somebody who, and you're offering them a shelter bed where it's a shelter with 200 to 300 other folks in essentially a big warehouse. And it may be 20 miles away from where they stay, where their family is, where they grew up, where their doctors are. And if that's what you have to offer them, yeah, they might say no. Frankly, I might myself if I were in that situation. But in the 15 plus years that I've been doing this work, where I've been able to offer somebody safe, appropriate housing, I've yet to have a single person come close to saying no.
I'm sure in the age of COVID that people do not want to go to a shelter. Has that gotten worse?
It's it's been really difficult in terms of our shelters, because we've actually had to cut the number of beds at our shelters to be able to allow for appropriate social distancing between beds. We've had to restructure how meals are served. Almost everything about how we provide shelter is altered by this. But I will say, we've as part of our response to COVID, we have what's called Project Room Key, where we've been working with the county and the city to rent hotels that would be otherwise vacant and use them for shelter for people who are especially vulnerable to COVID-19. So folks who are seniors or who have underlying medical conditions that would likely result in hospitalization or death if they were to get exposed. And so far, we've been able to house in these hotel rooms more than 4,000 people.
Oh, wow.
And so, again, if to that question of do people say no, I think this is a pretty clear example that if we have reasonable housing to offer people, no is not going to be the answer.
Okay. Well, clearly Dusty's story was about rediscovering faith. How do you feel faith plays a part in the homelessness crisis?
Oh, go ahead.
Either one, gentlemen.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Whether it's faith in a God or a higher power, or some other version of faith, I think it's essential. One of the, I for years have supervised outreach teams, and one of the things that I've shared with the teams as I've trained them is one of the biggest gifts we can give to folks out on the street is a sense of hope that there is something different and something better ahead for them. And, I think that's the essence of faith. So, I think it's essential. And again, regardless of how you define faith and to which God or how you worship or how you find that sense of support from the universe, I think it's essential in helping folks in making any major transition.
Yeah, I think with any traumatized human being or group of human beings, hope is not an abstraction. There's false science, but there's no such thing as false hope. Hope is as necessary to, for human beings to function as oxygen, and whatever the specific circumstances that homeless people are going through, part of what is going on is a loss of that essential ingredient in all of our lives, and providing hope to communities like that, I think is very important. And I do think that hope is at the core of what we call faith.
Amen. Amen. Well, Homewood LA's mission is to engage the community, to take action to end homelessness. How important, gentlemen, do you feel that the community's role is in solving this issue? How can we get people motivated, or do you feel like it's not a community issue?
No, I feel I feel like the problem is it's not it's not a priority. It's not a I'm sure it must drive you nuts, Nathaniel, when you hear every politician on both sides of the aisle saying, this is about the middle class. We need to save the middle class. No candidate in my lifetime has gone out there saying we need to deal with the poor, except for maybe Bobbie Kennedy. Right. So we need to understand that we're all connected. And by the way, even if you don't feel a moral imperative to lift people out of homelessness, it doesn't help the economy. It's a horrible loss of economic energy. So I think it's a matter of just rallying people and banging a drum and making them focus on it. And we fall into this dangerous acceptance of it. I know I do, and I think everybody does on some level.
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier, and I'm every day appalled at how we as a city, as a county, have come to accept that there are going to be people living outdoors, and that we just go on about our lives without feeling every day like we have to do something about it. I think we've all, to some degree, become just accustomed to it, which is it's frightening. I think it takes away from all of our humanity to be able to become accustomed to seeing folks living in abject poverty with nothing but a tent to call their own. So it's absolutely an issue that every person in this city, in this county, has a say in, has a stake in. Unless we make it an issue across the board that everybody is crying out saying this is inhumane, this is unjust. Until that point, we're not going to have it. Our budgets will be fiscal documents and not moral documents. And we have to get to a place where our budgets locally, at the state level, and at the national level are moral documents. And yeah.
Well, and it's I like it's obvious, but if there were a bunch of we have to face the fact that something is off in the way we are able to accept this. If there was a pack of feral dogs along the 110, I guarantee you the community would come together and make sure that they're okay. And we have, families out there. We have people who are going through very, very difficult times, and we just, drive by. We got to change that.
Yeah, I was out. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think, to the point of that I said earlier about making sure that we remember that each person experiencing homelessness is first a human being and an individual with a story, I think is where the general public really comes in, because, one of the hardest pieces we have in the rehousing system is finding landlords that are willing to work with us. NIMBYism is rampant. United Way does surveys, and with each survey, they find that the vast majority of the public are actually supportive of having housing for the homeless built in their neighborhoods, shelters being built nearby, but those are not the voices that are heard. It's the voices, the folks who are scared and or somehow morally opposed, which I don't really understand, but those who are in opposition to helping people experiencing homelessness are the ones who come out and speak the loudest. And so those are the voices that too often get heard. And so it is essential that every one of us uses our voice and calls out for justice for our fellow Angelenos who are forced to live outdoors and suffer as a result of our failings as a society.
Yeah, I mean, that's really our intention with Homewood LA, to really to humanize homelessness, right? To put a face to homelessness, like you so eloquently did with Dusty's story. I was out protesting in support of the Black Lives Matter movement, and led some chants, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, and everybody's with me. I said, what do we want? Justice. What do we want now? Right? Then I said, vote. I would have hit a brick wall. Like everything stopped. Like nobody said anything. How do we get people inspired? How do we get people motivated to take action to vote? I mean, that's a big part of it, right? Voting. What do we do to get people inspired, especially young people?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a problem because obviously the world is in a very difficult place. It was in a very difficult, inexcusable place for young people before the pandemic. The planet's on fire. Economic injustice is rampant. The ability to move up in society has almost been lost, and what the danger is that young people lose faith in the idea that their future is an act of their own creation, which is the underlying power of the democratic idea. They're also being told, there is a political party who is investing in suppressing voting and in eroding confidence in voting, and we need to battle that with our loudest voices on a daily basis. I think there's a sense of urgency now, but people can compartmentalize the political world when I think, as this virus and this economic crisis is showing, politics is the way you create your moral vision. I mean, the consequences are huge. I remember the explosion of homelessness in New York when Reagan cut funding for mental health, and immediately the consequences were on the streets. So we just need to remind young people that our political life makes a radical difference in their day-to-day lives and the lives of their fellow citizens. You just got to hammer it.
Well said. Gentlemen, I'm so thankful and honored to have you both with us. And we applaud you and commend you for the work that you both do in your respective careers. Thank you. You have any parting words for each other, or how we can end this?
No, I just want to say thank you, Nathaniel, for being on the ground and doing the real work. I want to say it really is. It meant a lot to me to be able to read this and send my love to Dusty. He sounds like a great guy.
He definitely.
Absolutely.
Thank you. We're so honored.
Thank you for having me. It's been an honor, and to folks who are watching, get out and vote, will you, please?
Please.
Do it. Wow. Another incredible night for Homewood Live. I want to thank you all for tuning in and encourage you to follow us on social media at facebook.com/Homewood LA, on Instagram at Homewood Los Angeles, and our website, www.homewoodla.org. Please leave your email address so that we can stay in touch with you and keep you abreast of the wonderful things that we have that are coming up, including a Homewood LA podcast, which we're really excited about. Now, I have to tell you that Dusty's story and all the stories you hear came from people who went through the Midnight Mission, an amazing nonprofit organization on Skid Row. Now, if tonight's story, Dusty's story, and Bradley Whitford and Nathaniel VerGow inspired you in any way, please give to the Midnight Mission to help them with their efforts. Now, no amount is too small or too large. We really appreciate that. Dusty so eloquently said, they're not bad people. They just made some mistakes. Now, I know if I'm like you, I never made any mistakes. Ha! Lies. I've made so many mistakes in my life. I'm flawed. How about you? Have you ever made any mistakes? Done some things that you are not proud of? Deal with those things. Address those things. Speak them out. Get some help. Seek counseling. Engage your community. Homewood LA is all about community, about inspiring the community to take action to end this crisis. We are them, and they are us. Think about that. Join us next week, Thursday, July 30th. Same time, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, as we welcome Mean Girls star and actor, Mr. Daniel Franzese, as he shares Brian's story about when the first time he did drag for the very first time in his life. Well, that's it. Keep building, keep climbing, keep shining. We are Homewood, LA. I'm Sean Baker, your host. This is Homewood Live. Peace and good night.